hour and a half or so after I had finished my court date, and so I decided to have some lunch and see if it was possible to attend the Public Security Commission meeting. And I was. The GI Cops group and the Montreal Cops, they were aware of that I had conditions against me, and they asked me about them, and they asked me if I had the paper with the conditions on it with me, and I said no. This was sort of a last-minute thing. It wasn't something I was initially planning to do. But they very kindly made a phone call to the appropriate authorities to determine what exactly my conditions were, whether or not I could be permitted to attend the meeting or not, and came back and said, yes, you can come in. So that was quite nice of them to, they could have just refused. They could have just said, well, come back with your papers kind of thing. But no, they took the extra step of determining for themselves whether or not it was possible for me to be there, and allowed me in. So that was quite nice. And I was able to ask a couple of questions about SPVM repression of freedom of expression and peaceful public protest and so on to the new interim police chief of Montreal, Martin Prudhomme. So it was good to be able to do that. I did not mention this specific most recent arrest for alleged criminal harassment, but I did bring up about how the Unitarian Church of Montreal, or at least leading members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, had accused me of violating section 176.3 of the Canadian Criminal Code back in December of 2000, 17 years ago, and how, to make a long story short, the case went to trial because the prosecutor refused to drop the charges, even though I told him I couldn't be seen inside the church, couldn't be heard inside the church, and so on. So I went to trial, and basically by cross-examining Val Bourdon and Jeremy Searle, cross-examining their prosecution witness testimony, it became obvious that, A, I couldn't be seen from inside the church, B, I couldn't be heard from inside the church, at least the church sanctuary, I should say, and C, that no church service had ever actually been disrupted. Basically, the prosecutor had to throw in the towel when he couldn't prove a single one of the 4 or 5 points of law he needed to prove beyond reasonable doubt to obtain a conviction for my alleged disrupting the order and solemnity of church services at the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And I suspect something similar is going to happen when my trial for the alleged criminal harassment of Sue Montgomery finally goes to trial. The first date, and indeed the only date for the trial, because it's expected to be a one-day trial, is September 10th, a little bit later than I was hoping. I had been hoping for an earlier date, even as early as April, if not April, maybe June, but got pushed forward all the way to early September for some reason. But nonetheless, I'm pretty confident that it will be almost impossible for a judge to convict me of criminal harassment of Sue Montgomery because there's at least 2 of the, I think, 5 points of law that the prosecutor needs to prove beyond reasonable doubt that I am very confident the prosecutor will not be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt. In fact, I expect to be able to introduce a considerable amount of reasonable doubt on at least two of the legal points that the prosecutor has to prove. So I'm pretty confident that I'll be acquitted if the court system works properly according to previous interpretations of the law, jurisprudence, and so on and so forth. I should be just fine. Anyhow, I see this former leader of the Unitarian Church of Montreal who came by earlier. Her first name's Marlowe, if I'm not mistaken. Her family name is eluding me. I think there's a Kennedy in it, but I'm not sure. But anyway, Marlowe Thomas. I think there's a Thomas in there. You know, she's sort of standing there looking at her phone. I suspect she's complaining about my presence here to the police. I should add that when it became clear that I could restart my protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, that I did actually call Station 11 and notified the community relations officers, both of them, that my conditions had been, that was a nice little friendly honk from a taxi. My conditions had been modified in such a way that allowed me to resume my protest in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal. I just wanted them to know beforehand so there were no surprises. I also phoned the front desk. So basically they're all aware that I had intended to resume my protest, so I'm not expecting them to show up, but you never know. Could happen. But yeah, for various reasons, one of them being that my battery is very weak and I somehow failed to bring a spare, and I'm thus have limited amount of video recording time available to me. Oh, there's Frank Green. Frank Green, yeah, one of the people who is most responsible for my being here and protesting against anti-religious intolerance and bigotry on the part of atheist Unitarian Universalists, amongst other things. Frank Green is one of the Montreal Unitarians who slandered an interreligious event that I'd organized as being a cult, and was instrumental in arranging for it to be banned from being celebrated in the Unitarian Church of Montreal. And he was also instrumental in my expulsion from the Unitarian Church of Montreal when I complained about that intolerance and bigotry. So yeah, Frank Green, definitely showing his age there, not quite as robust as he used to be, is one of a good number of Montreal Unitarians who is very, very deeply implicated in the reasons for my being out here protesting. So So we got a bit of snow coming down. It's going to have a little look here. Okay, so we're coming up to half an hour. See, I've only got 6% of battery power left, which basically means I'm done in terms of recording time. So that being the case, you know, I like to keep the camera running constantly to protect myself from false claims made about me by Montreal Unitarians, because they do call in false claims about my protest, and I've even been assaulted on occasion and so on. I like to be able to record pretty much everything. And what?
Prayers of kindness and loving forgiveness.
They haven't repented, they're not forgiven. When they repent, I'll consider forgiving them. But they're very, very stubborn, stiff-necked people, if you don't mind my using that term. So I think on that note, we're going to wrap up the protest, to be honest, because basically, I want to be in a position to record any chat with the police that might arise out of what appear to be possible calls to the police, trying to get them to come. And I'm not able to do so, at least not with this camera. I do have my cell phone with me. I could potentially record an interaction on my cell phone, but yeah, no, this is basically a little mistake I made. I walked out without my spare battery, and you know, I normally have at least one spare battery with me so that if one runs out, I can just pop in another one, but it didn't happen this morning. So I think we're going to wrap this up. I think we've done a pretty good little initial protest. We've done half an hour and basically just set the tone and made it clear that I'm resuming my protest. So that's probably good enough for today. And McGill. He's got a McGill University bag. It could be a professor, could be a janitor, could be a student, could be anyone. Could be someone who has no connection with McGill, just happened to be carrying a McGill bag. Anyhow, yeah, I think we're done. You know, it's basically a short little half-hour-ish protest. We've only got about a minute and a half of recording time left. It's starting to snow, which is not a problem for my picket signs because I do have plastic coverings to protect them, but it is a problem for the camera. Not a big one because it's just light flakes, but yeah, I think we're wrapping this up, and we shall go have breakfast. So this is the picket sign that I was displaying to the public in one hand, and this is the other one. Unitarian Universalist perversion of justice sucks you asterisk you. And indeed it does. And accusing me of criminal harassment is another perversion of justice as far as I'm concerned. That's pretty well it for today. Misuse and abuse of the criminal justice system by a Unitarian.